Good evening, Mr. President. Again, it's very nice to be with you this evening. We do have evening in our part of the world. You have a daytime. But despite the time difference, we are very close to each other. So, and definitely we would like to thank you for your readiness to be a member of the advisory board of organizing online elections in Belarus. We will talk a little bit about it later. But, our people, they were really interested about the situation in Latin America in general and in Venezuela in particular. We were following it since the mid of the 20th century when there were huge political processes happening inside Latin American countries. And we noticed that many countries of your continent were moving from totalitarianism, from autocracies towards democracies. And we all know the examples of Argentina. We all know the examples of Chile that used to be dictatorial regimes and now they're democratic countries. How you can characterize the situation in Venezuela in terms of the situation with human rights, whether you consider Venezuela a dictatorship, a democracy, or the country in transition?
Well, thank you for the interview. We want to help in a way to the cause of democracy and the liberty, of course, in Venezuela and all around the world. First of all, we must make it clear. Venezuela suffers from a dictatorship that serves the system of global authoritarianism that the oppressive regimes, the planet, intend to implement. The regime managed by Nicolás Maduro usurps power, causing a complex humanitarian crisis in terms of health, service, food, and so many other damage that have forced 7 million Venezuelans to leave country as refugees, becoming one of the most severe migratory crises in the world, on par with Ukraine. Even though we need have a formal war conflict, but we have in this moment suffering from a catastrophe as serious as that for more than 20 years. The country has been going through an unprecedented economic recession for many years due to corruption and destruction of the regime. But even more serious, the systematic violation of human rights have been perpetrated against the population. And not only Juan Guaido says so today, but also the United Nations fact-finding mission, which has pointed directly that in Venezuela the regime has committed continuous crimes against humanity, keeping more than 300 political prisoners kidnapped and tortured. All this as even the lead International Criminal Court to open a formal investigation. As you know, Maduro is a close ally of Lukashenko and a close ally of Putin in America. In Venezuela, repression, terror, and torture are common practices of the criminal gang that holds country institutions hostage, and the main responsible for this is directly the dictator Nicolás Maduro. So we are in the same struggle as Belarus, as Ukraine, indeed, for liberty and democracy in this moment.
Well, and we definitely saw pictures on the world TV about how many people were trying to flee Venezuela to different countries. I think in this particular story, I saw that they were fleeing to Colombia, if I'm not mistaken. But just whether they were trying to escape from poverty, from their disastrous economic situation, or from the persecution because of the political activity, political liberties, or both?
Both. Our people are fleeing or running away against crimes against humanity, the poverty, the hungry, and the lack of medicine, services, and food. So it's a combination, a complex humanitarian crisis that the Maduro regime has been created for corruption, for hold the power against the will of the people. That's why we are not only in a resistance movement, but also proposing free and fair elections to mobilize our people to organize the resistance also, but put our goal or achieve in a solution to that poverty, the lack of services, and of course, medicine and other things in Venezuela.
Yeah, well, that's really amazing. The country that is very, very rich in natural resources. I think that Venezuela has the fourth largest world oil reserves. Well, the fourth in the world. And you are talking about poverty. That's really, a reflection of a dictatorial regime, that they are not efficient, having so much natural resources. You're talking about people fleeing the country because of the poverty. So it's a kind of inconsistent in the mind of our people. So really, it's and people still they fight with the poverty in Venezuela, right? Because when I was there, I remember the big line people, and they were staying in line to get some potatoes or some dry milk. Is it still the case in Venezuela, or just now the life is getting better?
Well, in this moment, the regime has to open some spaces of economic activities because they themselves there are smuggles and there are people who sustain them in the economic way need this. 3 years ago, use dollars in Venezuela or anything other exchange was a crime. In this moment, the Bolivar is our liberator back in 18th century. That's the name of our currency. It's gone. It's disappeared. We have to use the dollar or the Colombian peso or the euro. In this moment, are some activities that gain space with the people, but our people don't reach the cost of anything. We have 74% of extreme poverty in Venezuela, 90% of poverty around Venezuela. That's the reason that our people flee away, that we have more refugees and migrants than Ukraine in the middle of a horrible war. So we have to resist. We have to put solutions in front to our people to save life. In this moment, our people are passing through the Darien self because they don't have anything to eat in Venezuela. As you know, that Darien, it's a wood, one of the most dense of the planet. 60,000 Venezuelan pass through, and most of our women are violated, raped in that woods. It's a very dark situation. It's a very very complex situation. That's why we need to move on to achieve democracy, to achieve liberty, to gain spaces to our people.
Yeah, well, we noticed it just observing the situation in Ukraine, that dictatorial regimes are not only economically not sufficient, but also military. Well, we know that the army is a very conservative structure, but we can see now that the very subordinative Russian army is losing to the army of the country that has a democracy and that people on the ground can take an initiatives on themselves. So they can take decision by themselves. And Russia, because they are subordinate, like, just in a dictatorial regime, so they have to send generals close to the front. And, I think that it's about 10 generals were killed during this war on the Russian side, because the local commanders cannot take a decision. And this is because of the lack of democracy, the lack of the initiative, but the dictatorial structure of the Russian army as well as Russian society. And in a dictatorial regime, people are afraid of telling the truth. They normally say what their boss would like to hear rather than telling the truth. But if you do not know the truth, you cannot take the right decision. That's very obvious. Juan, could you tell us, please, what countries of Latin America are on the same, let's say, stage, on the same level as Venezuela? Or Venezuela is just, to a certain extent, unique. So we do know Cuba on one side, we do know the democracies in Argentina, in Brazil, in Chile. Now on the other side, Venezuela is definitely different, but what other countries of Latin America can you describe the same problem as Venezuela has?
Well, the countries have a dictator trying to avoid the rules of law, democracy, to oppress their people. It's like the situation in Nicaragua with Daniel Noriega dictators and Díaz-Canel in Cuba, among others. There are legitimate tyrants who keeps trying to usurpation the power. It's very similar that the struggle happened in Belarus for multiple reasons. Lukashenko is like Maduro. Lukashenko is like Noriega. It's like Díaz-Canel. After fraudulent process in 2020, in Venezuela happened in 2018. Authoritarianism keeps the population repressed, making dissidents, political prisoners, prisoners of conscience, who should never have been deprived of their freedom, against Maduro does in Venezuela, Ortega in Nicaragua. We have a common struggle in Belarus and Venezuela and Latin America with other people of, I insist, Nicaragua and Cuba. This is why Venezuelan democratic forces join democratic forces of Belarus, because we have got a common enemy. We pursue the same goal, to return democracy and freedom to our countries. For the sake of our citizens, we understand, with all the dissident of the war in the face of oppression, the historic commitment we must confront this axis of global authoritarianism formed by Putin, maybe Maduro, Lukashenko, Ortega, because we are in this moment the hope of the people who want to live in freedom. And we will not rest until we achieve it.
Yeah, you mentioned when we had the meeting of our board of advisors that elections is the only instrument that can reinvigorate the public life of any country, any society. Do you still believe in elections? Do you still believe that the power can come only from the people or from some other substances like gourd or goodwill of a dictator or any other way? What do you think?
The main power of the democracy is our people, is to empower our people. One of the fundamental pillar of democratic system it's the elections, of course, achieve the conditions to a whole free and fair and verifiable election must be the transversal goal of the democratic coalition in the world. All efforts must go in one direction: political situation, solution. Political solution that include attention to the institutional crisis that today force the population of countries in a dictatorship into tragedy through achieve legal, social, and electoral guarantees. Before any electoral process, of course, the condition must be considered, because the problem is not the institution of the vote, of the will of the people. The profound difficulty in dictatorship nations such as Belarus or Venezuela is the absence of conditions to implement the electoral process. So, organize our people, mobilize to that goal, democracy, liberty, significant. It's very important to, of course, both nations urgently need to change their socio-political scheme through a fair ballot. But this process can be genuine will doesn't respect the will of the people. And this is why the dictators don't allow the necessary condition of transparency and observation. You live in 2020 because they require parameters for genuinely free and fair elections. But I insist, the mobilization of our people, the power to the exercise of our rights, is a very powerful tool. In parallel, in the same direction, of course, the international pressure, of course, the diplomacy, it's important, but the internal mobilization, the will of our people, it's indispensable. The free world have to assume the appropriate measures. So, in the countries oppressed by the dictators, we can achieve freedom by articulating efforts in both in similar ways. In the same time, we can mobilize international pressure and we can achieve freedom by articulating all that efforts. As freedom fighters, we must be with the will of the people, with the empowerment of the people, and of course, we are with Belarusian people.
Well, thank you. I think that you've already answered this question, but I still should ask it once again. Why do you think all dictators around the world, they're afraid of elections and they're afraid of referendums? If they organize elections or referendum, they always make it fake. Why do you think they're afraid of being put themselves on test and see what the real will of people is?
The dictators are all around the world, and they have to have some simulation that they hold the power because the people love them. We know that the people want liberty. We know that people want their freedom. They want to decide. We don't want to live with fear. We want to live with hope, with certainty in the future, in the present. And the people, our people, can do that when they are afraid to say, of course, that the people think. The dictators, Lukashenko, Maduro, of course, are afraid from the organization, the mobilization. That's why they use total repression against. We raise our voices that organize our people. So we have to insist. We have to move on. We have to organize. We have to vote. We have to achieve better conditions, better organization, better communication with our people to empower them, to make the next step on the struggle for democracy, not only in Venezuela, not only in Belarus, but all around the world. Nicaragua, Uganda, of course, Cuba, and all our people are suffer from oppression. So the organization, the referendum, the vote, our rights, exercise that right is a very good way to fight against Lukashenko and dictators in any country. Of course, I know the risk. I know about all the intimidation, the torture against that's a step from our people, but the risk to live under oppression, it's more danger than the risk of achieve democracy. So go on, organize, and you count on Venezuela. Of course, we are in a very difficult situation too, but we have to raise our voices together for democracy and for exercise our rights.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, for your time. Let we continue staying in touch and let democracies in both of our countries on the continent of Latin America and in Central Eurasia, in Eurasia in general, will overcome all the authoritarian and totalitarian regimes. I think that after all, people will get the right to choose the government they want to see and the government that people want to govern them, and the ability to change this government from time to time, because it's really a bad thing when you once elect a government, even it can come in a democratic way, and then you cannot change it. It means dictatorship. Well, that's how we both understand it. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and let me be staying in touch.
Democracy must prevail.
I agree.